I have been using my new M1 Max MacBook Pro 16 for the past 4 days and I am really satisfied with its overall performance. However, the big concern is whether you truly need the higher spec model or if the base model will be good enough. Please watch the entire video to find out, as I will go over each use case in detail to determine the appropriate specs for each sort of task. The new MacBook Pros with M1 Pro and M1 Max CPUs are great. They are the quickest laptops I have ever used in most tasks, and they have some of the best battery life I have ever seen. Apple's major bet on ditching Intel CPUs and AMD GPUs in favor of its own Apple Silicon processors is paying out phenomenally, and if you can afford to buy one of these machines, you will be very pleased. They are awesome. The new MacBook Pros, on the other hand, are not without flaws, and the Mac software ecosystem is still catching up to the Apple Silicon. So unlike my first impression of the MacBook Air with an M1 CPU last year, the Mac software ecosystem may not allow you to get most out of these computers for a while yet, depending on your needs and tools you use. But make no mistake, the performance Apple has achieved with these machines, paired up with the extraordinary battery life, means the industry has new benchmark, one that Intel, AMD, Nvidia and every other laptop manufacturer will find difficult to match anytime soon. The entry-level MacBook Pro 16 ships with an M1 Pro chip packing 10-core CPU, 16-core GPU, 16 GB of unified memory and 512 GB of SSD storage. All this will cost you £2,300 in UK, though you can pay extra to upgrade the memory to 32 GB or expand the storage up to 8 TB. If you require more graphic power, you can upgrade to a model that comes with Apple's new M1 Max chip, the most powerful piece of Apple Silicon yet, with a 10-core CPU and up to a 32-core GPU. The difference between Pro and Max is determined by the GPU performance. The M1 Pro comes with 16-core GPU, while the M1 Max comes with 32-core GPU, with 24-core GPU available as a mid-tier upgrade option. The M1 Pro supports a maximum of 32 GB of unified memory, while the M1 Max can be upgraded up to 64 GB of unified memory. Apple claims that the CPU in M1 Pro and M1 Max is up to 70% faster than the CPU in the original M1. The GPU in M1 Pro is up to 2 times faster than the GPU in M1, and the GPU in M1 Max is 4 times faster than the original M1 GPUs. The M1 Pro and M1 Max, like the M1, use the same system on a chip architecture, with the M1 Pro supporting up to 200 GB per second of memory bandwidth and M1 Pro supporting up to 400 GB per second of memory bandwidth. My review unit has M1 Max chip with 32-core GPU along with 32 GB of RAM and 1 TB of hard drive. Okay, let's talk about the design now. The new 16-inch MacBook Pro has been completely redesigned. It's nearly the same size and just a tad thicker compared to the Intel-based 16-inch Pro it replaces, measuring 14.01 by 9.77 inches. It is 0.66 inches thick and weighs 4.7 pounds and 4.8 pounds if you go for M1 Max edition. The 100% recycled aluminum chassis features a flatter lid than its predecessors, with a vent carved out of either side for better cooling and revamped 6-speaker sound system on the inside. Trust me, the new design is excellent. For so long, Apple has made so many sacrifices in the name of thinness that it was about time for the pendulum to swing back, and the extra thickness allows for the better cooling and the return of some useful ports. There is a Thunderbolt 4 port, an HDMI port and full-size SD-XC slot on the right hand side, and 2 Thunderbolt 4 ports and a MagSafe power connector on the left. There is also a 3.5mm headphone jack on the left with the support for high impedance headphones. The MagSafe 3 connector is fantastic. If you pull it straight, it's powerful enough to drag the MacBook Pro along the desk. But if you pull it at an angle, it disconnects instantaneously. Also, via MagSafe, MacBook Pro 16 can be fast charged up to 50% in just 30 minutes with 140 watt power adapter. So while the ports are unquestionably more convenient and perfectly adequate in most situations, there are still compelling reasons to visit Dongle Town. Yeah, let me tell you why. macOS Monterey now supports variable refresh rate external display via a VESA standard known as Adaptive Sync, but you will need a Thunderbolt 2 DisplayPort dongle for that. Also, be warned that the ports aren't the top spec. It's an HDMI 2 port, not 2.1, so no 4K 120Hz output through HDMI. And the SD card slot is only UHS 2, not the faster UHS 3 or SD Express. In my opinion, you may see HDMI 2.1 and faster UHS 3 in next year model. Let's talk about the display now. This 16.2-inch Liquid Retina XDR display is one of the most fantastic laptop displays I have ever seen. It is the same bright, vibrant mini LED display we saw in the 12.9-inch iPad Pro 2021, except this one has a resolution of 3456 by 2234 with Apple's ProMotion adaptive refresh rate of up to 120 Hz. To me, it looks like there is less blooming on this display compared to the iPad Pro's display when viewing bright white text with a black background. If you are watching a movie, you might notice some blooming when controls appear over black, especially if you are looking at the screen off axis. If you're wondering that closed caption would cause blooming when watching a video, the answer is no. YouTube captions are displayed over a gray box anyway, and Apple TV, Netflix captions are mostly displayed over the video itself. It is now a mini LED screen, which means the backlight is made up of 10,000 tiny LEDs organized into over 2,500 local dimming zones. That means black on this display can get really dark, up to 1,000,000:1 contrast ratio, just like an OLED screen. It's an XDR display, exactly like the Pro Display XDR. It can also reach a peak brightness of 1600 nits with a continuous brightness of 1000 nits, just as Pro Display XDR. But it is not what you think. The display is generally set to a maximum brightness of 500 nits, which I think is more than enough, and you can easily use it outside in bright sunlight. Out of the box, the new MacBook Pro are set to display profile called Apple XDR display, which allows it to hit that 1600 nit peak brightness, but only when viewing HDR content. It is quite amazing to watch HDR content in a small window on the screen hitting peak brightness of 1600 nits and the rest of the screen set to 500 nits of brightness. The good news is that everything works incredibly well. HDR videos appear fantastically bright with amazing colors and saturation in every app I've tried, including YouTube in Chrome and Safari. The HDR brightness levels follow the content around the screen in real time, demonstrating the mini LED backlights in work. In short, this is a 500 nit display that has a capability of reaching up to 1600 nits, but only when HDR content is displayed on it. The final bit of display upgrade is ProMotion, Apple's variable refresh rate system that allows the display to run at any frequency between 24 and 120 Hz. However, in normal non-gaming use, I could only just barely see the improvement that 120 Hz provide. Overall, this display looks amazing, and a little minor blooming is a fair trade-off for such deep black levels. I don't have Apple's Pro Display XDR, but from what I have read online, I believe this display is superior to Apple's Pro Display XDR, which has fewer dimming zones, more blooming, and off-axis color and brightness shift. This display has none of those flaws. It's bright, color accurate, and generally pleasing to the eye. Lastly, there's a notch at the top of the display, which houses 1080p webcam, camera LED, the True Tone light sensor, and the ambient light sensor. Me rather thinking that the notch is eating into the display, I imagine the display becoming larger except in that one spot. The MacBook Pro has 16:10 display with a little extra space at the top of the menu bar and the notch. You don't notice it after a few minutes, just like you didn't notice the iPhone notch. The upgraded webcam is far superior to the previous gen 720p webcam with much better performance in low light and also has a higher dynamic range. Apple put a new 6-speaker sound system in the 16-inch Pro that supports spatial audio and Dolby Atmos, as well as a new triple microphone array designed to better sound capture. In my opinion, it sounds better than the last gen 16-inch MacBook Pro with deeper bass and clear vocals. Microphones are more than good enough for Zoom calls and podcast recordings. I have large hands and dislike shallow, cramped laptop keyboards, but I enjoy using the large Magic Keyboard built into this MacBook Pro 2021. I wish the keys had a little more travel, but I found the keyboard to be comfortable and simple to use for all my daily tasks, including typing this review. Touch bar is gone as requested by many and is replaced by function keys, which I think is a better step by Apple, so no more those annoying accidental touches. The Touch ID sensor is built into the top right power key. It also works well. The trackpad is large enough for comfortable use. More importantly, it's accurate enough that I never had any trouble using it to scroll and tab my work through my workday, and it does a great job of picking up gesture commands in my experience. Now let's talk about the performance. These are the most powerful laptops I have ever tested for content creation and creative work. The basic M1 family chip design is simple to grasp because fundamental components are all the same in 3 chips. Apple has 3 types of processor cores: efficiency, performance, and GPU. And all M1 chips are different combinations of these cores with a unified memory between them. Last year, MacBook Pro 13 had a regular M1 with 4 efficiency cores, 4 high performance cores, and 8 GPU cores. The M1 Pro and M1 Max changed their core count to 10 with 2 efficiency cores and up to 8 high performance cores. The main distinction is in GPUs. The regular M1 has up to an 8-core GPU, the M1 Pro has up to a 16-core GPU, and M1 Max comes in 24 and 32-core configuration. Again, the GPU cores are the same on all the chips. You just get more of them as you move up the range, along with faster memory with higher total limits and additional specialized video encoders. Also, M1 Max has double the number of video encoders compared to M1 Pro, and it turns out that cramping these chips with extra cores and specialized video encoders makes them super fast for creative work. H.265 10-bit files from Canon R5, which can be extremely hard to deal with even for top-spec iMac or highly spec'd Windows desktop, can easily be edited and color graded on M1 Max MacBook Pro 16. I have edited multiple 8K RAW files on this MacBook Pro using both DaVinci Resolve and Final Cut Pro without missing any frames at all. And the most amazing part is that all this can be done on battery power. MacBook Pro performs equally well on battery power as when connected with the 140-watt adapter. The M1 Max with 32-core GPU in my 16-inch MacBook Pro gives it enough power to handle most games you throw at it as long as they are supported by the operating system. I have tried Dota 2 in the highest graphic configuration, both connected with an adapter and on a battery power. I can confirm that there is no difference in performance. At 1080p on average, I got 120 frames per second, which is the highest frame rate per second this screen can support. And at the highest resolution that MacBook 16 can support, I was getting on average 102 frames per second. From what I have read online, M1 Pro chips with 16-core GPUs will give you 45 to 50% less performance in gaming compared to the M1 Max chip with 32-core GPU. Even though these laptops are not hardcore gaming machines, but if you are planning to game on these laptops along with other work, my advice is to go for M1 Max MacBook Pro with 32 GPU cores. As I have mentioned before, that the great thing about these laptops are that they perform as good on battery power as they perform plugged in. So this is one of the advantages compared to the Windows gaming laptop. In my experience, MacBook Pro 16 can give you up to 6 hours of high performance gaming on battery alone, which is unheard of in Windows laptop world. Gaming performance is somewhere in between RTX 3060 and RTX 3050, even though Apple stated M1 Max graphics performance is close to RTX 3080. That is true for video editing or graphic designing, but definitely not true when it comes to gaming. One of the reasons for this can be game optimization. As most games are optimized for Windows, it is very hard to compare MacBook Pro gaming performance with Windows laptop. Anyway, don't buy MacBook Pro for hardcore gaming, as you can buy 3 or 4 Windows based gaming laptops for the price of M1 Max MacBook Pro. As I have stated before, I am saying it again, do not buy these laptops for hardcore gaming. It's not these laptops are not capable enough to play those games, but the problem is most of the games, they are not designed for the Mac OS. Most of the game, they are optimized for Windows operating system, so you will not find many games to play on these laptops. Plus, if you want to play AAA titles or the games which require high frames per second, you need to go for the Windows laptops with a higher refresh screens, and they will perform much better compared to these new MacBook Pros. Apple claims that the MacBook Pro 2021 16-inch can run for up to 14 hours on a single charge, but based on my testing, it performed better than that. My MacBook Pro delivered an outstanding 14 hours and 43 minutes of battery life on a single charge in my battery test, which involves YouTube video playback, endless web surfing over the Wi-Fi with its screen brightness set to 200 nits. This is an incredibly long-lasting laptop, outlasting most competitors I have ever tested. This new MacBook Pro also has a fast charging capabilities, and in my experience, it lives up to the Apple's promise of going from critical to 50% battery in about 30 minutes. Even though you can't charge this laptop through USB-C, but keep in mind that the fast charging is only available through MagSafe. This MacBook Pro 2021 16-inch is an across-the-board improvement over its predecessors. So if you have been considering investing in a 16-inch Pro, this is unquestionably the model to buy. With its remarkable battery life, outstanding speed, smartly designed chassis, and a big, beautiful screen, this is a versatile Pro laptop that will serve you equally well in work or play. Now the question is, what spec you need to go for? I think for 90% of us, base model MacBook Pro 16 with M1 Pro chip and 16 GB of unified memory will be good enough. Just upgrade the storage to 1 TB from 512 MB. If occasionally your system will require more memory, there is always a super fast storage to be used as a swap memory. If you play games, want to edit multiple 8K files with faster render times, or do complex 3D work, then go for M1 Max chip with 32 core GPU. but no need to upgrade to 64 GB unified memory, as it is an overkill for 99.9% of us. Configuring your MacBook Pro 16 with M1 Max chip will guarantee you some of the best performances you can buy in MacBook. Hope this video has been useful for you. Please do consider subscribing and liking the video. Till next time, take care.